This is the Stories of the Quiet Revolution by Gary McCubbin. I'm telling the story today of the leader of the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. It's the amazing story of what happened to him afterwards, and he has joined the Quiet Revolution. Captain Mishitu Fushita had risen through the ranks of the Japanese Naval Air Force while logging over 10,000 hours of flight time, mostly from the deck of Japanese carriers. He had gained extensive military service during Japan's expansion into China. As a result, he was chosen to help plan and to lead the great air assault on the American fleet at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. At 6 a.m. that morning, Captain Fushida led the first wave of 180 fighter aircraft towards Pearl Harbor. At 7:40, he pulled back the canopy of his airplane and fired a green flare, which was to indicate to all of the other planes that the attack was to commence and to begin. At 7:49, he commanded his flight lieutenant to send a message to the flagship, Akai, that the attack would begin and that they had caught the Americans completely by surprise. Tora, Tora, Tora was the command that came, which was the name of the movie that was made in 1970 about the attack on Pearl Harbor. He remained over Pearl Harbor until the second wave of attackers came and to assess the damage. His plane was shot 21 times by anti-aircraft, but amazingly and miraculously, his plane survived and he did not crash. The attack on the Hawaiian U.S. Naval Base resulted in 2,400 American deaths and 64 Japanese deaths. The following day, the United States declared war upon Japan, and the United States entered the Second World War. The attack on Pearl Harbor was a great military success, but it was a great strategic failure because the Japanese did not recognize how the Americans and the Allies would respond. And eventually, by the end of the war, some 3 million Japanese were to die. So it was a great tragedy. During the Battle of Midway that took place later, Captain Fushida was not able to participate because he had an appendicitis. When he was on the carrier, or the flagship Akai, it was hit by American aircraft, and he had to evacuate the bridge by lowering himself down with a rope. An explosion occurred that threw him to the deck and broke both of his ankles. Having broken both ankles, he then became a staff officer for Vice Admiral Kekukata, and he was ordered back to Tokyo just before Kekuta failed to stop the American invasion of Guam. He would otherwise then have participated in the Japanese symbolic ceremony of harikari, a ritual type of suicide. As he said later to a reporter, "Again, the sword of death missed me by only inches." On August 5th, 1945, Fushida was in Hiroshima, attending a military conference, when he was abruptly summoned back to Tokyo. The following day, the United States dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima, and Fushida was part of the assessment team that went back to Hiroshima to survey the damage. Amazingly, all of the assessment team eventually died from radiation poisoning, except for Fushida. After returning to his family after the war and to their chicken farm, he later recalled, "Life had no meaning or taste to me. I had missed death so many times. And what for? And what did it mean?" Perhaps your life is like that too. You're wondering what life is all about. Is there a purpose for life? Why am I here? Why am I suffering the things that I have gone through? Why have I missed death a number of times? Fushida was to find out what the real meaning of life was all about. Following the war, General Douglas MacArthur, who was in charge of the Japan after the war, summoned Fushida to testify in Tokyo. There were some war trials going on. Fushida was disgusted with the idea of war trials, and he thought that everyone should know that war was war and that cruel acts occurred on both sides. He believed that Americans were certainly as cruel to their captives as the Japanese were. It was then that he met his former flight engineer, who he had presumed had died in the Battle of Midway. Instead, rather, he had been taken prisoner. Rather than hearing a story of abuse and torture by Americans, his former flight engineer told him of a young woman, Peggy Corvell, who had treated him and the other Japanese prisoners of war with great kindness. Peggy's parents had been missionaries in Japan until 1939, when they had departed for safety reasons to the Philippines and sent their children back to the United States. Eventually, the parents were captured by the Japanese and executed on Sunday morning, December 19th, 1943. In fact, before the soldiers beheaded them, their parents asked and were granted 30 minutes to pray for their executioners. Fushida could not understand why they would pray to a God who could not save them. Why would Corvell's parents pray for their enemies when they would soon be beheaded? Why would Peggy return to Japan to assist with the Japanese prisoners of war? In Fushida's moral framework, the duty of virtue required revenge to prove loyalty to loved ones whose honor had been disgraced. In Peggy's case, Fushida saw no rationale for Peggy's forgiveness or a higher obligation to love someone, especially someone's enemy. After the war, in 1948, Fushida was in a railway station in Tokyo when a Western man handed him a pamphlet with this startling title, "I Was a Prisoner in Japan." It recounts the story of Jacob de Chazar, who was one of General Doolittle's raiders whose B-25 bombers bombed Japan the year after Pearl Harbor, 1942. His plane departed from the deck of the carrier USS Hornet and dropped bombs over Nagoma, Japan. Because they didn't have enough fuel to fly back to the carrier, their plan was to go on and to land in China. But because of a hole in the windshield, the plane used extra gas, and they had to crash land in China, but in the Japanese-controlled part of China. The Japanese captured them, and de Chazar was in several POW camps for 40 months. 34 of those months, he was in solitary confinement. He was beaten and starved, and 3 of his crew were executed by firing squad. A 4th member died of starvation. During de Chazar's time in prison, he saw the cruelty of his captors and developed a deep hatred for them. After approximately 25 months, though, he asked his guards for a copy of the Bible. They finally relented and gave him a Bible and told him he could only have it for 3 weeks. In the POW camp, he read the Bible and accepted the message of salvation through Jesus Christ, and it changed his life completely. He began to learn Japanese, and he began to treat his captors with respect. The guards responded positively. He resolved to one day bring the message of salvation to Japan. 10 days before the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, American soldiers parachuted into his prisoner of war camp and set him free. He returned to the United States, where he went to Seattle Pacific College, where he had an education, and then returned to Japan, not with bombs, but with the message of the Quiet Revolution. Eventually, he established a church in Nagoya, the very city where he had bombed years before. The example of Peggy Covell and Jacob DeShazer created in Fashuta a desire to know more about the Christian God. In 1949, Fushida purchased a Bible near the same railroad station where he had received the pamphlet. As he read the Gospels, he came to understand the reason for the forgiveness that had motivated Peggy and Jake. It was the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, where he prayed, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." In April 14th of the following year, he accepted Christ as his Savior. In May, he went to where DeShazer resided and was working as a missionary and knocked on the door. DeShazer answered, and Fushida said, "I've desired to meet with you, Mr. DeShazer. My name is Fashita." After a moment, DeShazer recognized the name and welcomed him in. The former enemies embraced, and Fushida spent the rest of his life as an evangelist. His booklet, From Pearl Harbor to Calvary, recounts the story of his faith. My hope is that my poor rendering of this story will motivate you to read the entire book of Fushida's life that he wrote, From Pearl Harbor to Calvary. It's available on Amazon for 99 cents. It's about an hour's read. It took me longer because it was such a fascinating story. In some places, it's almost comical to hear about all the times that he escaped death through plane crashes and miraculous events that happened in his life, and somehow God protected him. It's a fascinating story, and to read it in his own words is truly amazing. My hope, then, is that as he joined the Quiet Revolution, his story will point you also to join the Quiet Revolution today. And you will invite the leader of the Quiet Revolution into your life. Perhaps you have hatreds in your own life. Perhaps there are people you cannot forgive. Perhaps you have suffered things that you think are simply beyond human ability. And yet his story may help and encourage to you to come and join the revolution. If you have any comments or letters, send them to 619 School Drive, Wadsworth, Ohio, or to send it to the email address that is at the bottom of the screen. Thank you for listening, and I invite you to come and join the revolution.
You are watching WCTV, Wadsworth Community Television.